Hey fearsome friends, I've got some amazing stories for you tonight, and thank you to all the writers that submitted them. They really are quite gruesome, so be warned. Now let's sit back, relax, get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. I gripped my steering wheel tightly, knuckles bone white with tension, shoulders bunched up and sore. The road spun out endlessly under my tires, a strip of slick black silk painted with bold yellow lines. My eyes noticed and then promptly ignored the beauty of the dark-washed scenery around me. There was only one room for one thought in my mind. I had been at the end of my rope for some time now, but still too much of a coward to just turn out my own lights. I had tried therapy, only for the bitch to laugh and tell me I was beyond help. I had tried talking to the people in my life, but my own parents just shrugged it off. I had even tried drugs and alcohol to drown my depression, but I had found out the hard way that it wasn't the right road to go down. I had been debating over the best method of my execution when a friend of mine I hadn't heard from in years messaged me out of the blue. After some emotional pouring out that left me feeling drained but somewhat relieved, my friend gave me some information that had led me to where I am now, driving down Route 236 in the middle of the night. She had told me to come to the beginning of the highway and just drive and think about my feelings and my depression, let it really take over me. Then she said that's when she would come and make it all better. I remember pressing her on who she was, but she wouldn't tell me. She just said that she would come only when I was at the very, very end and couldn't stand it anymore, and that she would take all the hurt away. She had made it abundantly clear that for the entire time she was with me, I was not to look at her, or I would belong to her. As long as I kept my eyes away, I would be fine. I would be healed. Desperate for any relief from the impending shadow of my own death, I had agreed. I scoured the shadowed landscape around me for any sign of movement, but saw nothing. My fingers clenched even tighter as hot tears prickled behind my eyes and my heart hitched, and suddenly I was bawling out loud, great big gasping sobs that racked my body and forced me to struggle for breath. I pulled over blindly on the side of the highway, threw the car into park, buried my face in my hands, and just openly sobbed. It was like expressing poison from a snake bite. An enormous weight lifted on my chest in a flood of emotional downpour, as I cried out every bit of hurt I'd ever struggled to push down. In the midst of my sobs, the temperature in my car dropped noticeably. And even in the dry heat of the desert summer, goosebumps rose to prominence on my arms. A cold chill wormed its way up my spine and between my shoulder blades with an icy fingertip, and my breath hung in the air like frozen crystal vapors. Then the voice spoke from behind me, murmuring soft things I could almost hear. Immediately my hair stood on end. The voice, which I had been somewhat expecting to be deep and powerful, was little more than a high-pitched whisper of breath that drifted to my ears from somewhere beyond my vision. But it felt wrong. My entire being screamed at me to not turn around, not to lay my eyes on whatever was currently occupying my back seat, because to do so would mean the instant loss of whatever sanity I had left. And all at once, I knew that she had come. As if in response to my mental acknowledgement of the heavy presence, a soft breath drifted to my ears, but with it came the sickening stench of 1,000 rotting corpses under a blanket of desert sun, and I was unable to stop myself. I threw open the car door and emptied the last 3 days' worth of food from my stomach in a splatter on the pavement. After my stomach had settled, the voice came again. "I can taste your pain." Then a hiss like an indrawn breath. "What is it that you want from me?" I had had a million things to ask, a million points of hurt I wanted to spill, but that all vanished in an instant, leaving only white-hot honesty. With tears threatening to fall again, I sighed brokenly. "I want it to stop hurting." There was silence, followed by a dark, throaty chuckle that made me want to scream. "Is that all? Come, I want to show you something." The back door of my car opened, and I physically felt the oppressive presence leave my aura. Careful to keep my eyes averted, I followed the voice over to the side of the road. I sensed rather than saw her raise an arm and point down into the darkness. "Look there," she said. I squinted out into the darkness and was able to barely make out a pair of glowing taillights far down below. With horror, I realized that there was no footing there, only an endless void of darkness down a sheer face. I stepped back, a lump in my throat, and turned back for the comfort of my car. But when I turned around, my car was gone. Sputtering and stammering, I nearly forgot myself. Then turning in the general direction of the voice, I managed to catch myself, just as a flash of white flickered into and back out of my view. "Where is my car?" Again I sensed her point down at those suddenly damning twin spots of flame red, so far down in the darkness. "That is you down there. You drove yourself off the cliff." I pressed my hands hard against my ears and squeezed my eyes shut in a weak attempt to block out her lies. But all at once, freezing cold hands were on mine, forcing mine down to my sides and unblocking my ears, and her rancid breath flooded my nostrils with the odor of rot. I swallowed my gorge and forced my eyes shut even tighter, my friend's warning standing out in stark white against the blank whirling fury of my mind. "You wanted to die, did you not?" The voice was no longer a breathy whisper, but a deep roar of monstrous proportions. The force of the voice blew my hair back and showered my face with foul-smelling spittle. I felt the cold hands move up and grip me by my upper arms, and suddenly I knew what was coming next. I struggled to twist away from those freezing cold hands. "No, please," the voice boomed again. "You wanted to die, so die." And with that I was thrown violently out off the cliff and into the void of darkness. I snapped my eyes open and screamed, covering my face with my arms and fighting to brace for impact. And when it finally came, I'd crashed against the surface and plummeted down underneath the freezing cold water. Disorientated, sore from the impact and still screaming, I clawed my way up to the surface. My scream choking off when I felt the icy hand grip my ankle and pull me down, hold me down under the water. I kicked at the fingers that dug into the tender skin of my ankle, but it was like kicking stone. My lungs burned in my chest, and I felt myself start to grey out. My vision went dark, and I opened my mouth to scream. The water poured down my throat and into my lungs, and just as my lungs felt like they were about to explode, I was hauled out of the water by more hands I couldn't see. I was surrounded by yammering voices, some men and some women, and was soaking wet and gasping for air. But the invisible hands that gripped me forced me along anyway, to a wooden pole standing upright all by itself. The voices around me began to clear up, even as I felt more hands press my back up against the pole. My hands were then tied behind me with thick rough rope that dug deep and scraped my wrists raw, and it was then that I heard the chant begin spreading. "Burn the witch, burn the witch, burn the witch." "Wait, what?" I cried out, fighting to get free of the ropes that lashed me fast to the hard post behind me, but to no avail. "I'm not a witch!" "That's what they all say," an invisible woman's voice jeered in my ear. "But you're a witch, just as clear as I can see you. And guess what? You're going to burn." The voices around me melted back into a wordless clamor, and then I felt the heat and looked down in horror. A flame had already been drawn to life in the pile of wood that now surrounded my feet, and the yellow-red tongues climbed higher, licking at my feet hungrily. I screamed in pain as my pants caught fire, and my skin began to bubble and char as the fabric seared to my very flesh. In mere moments I was reduced to helpless agony, as I felt my flesh melting off my bones, leaving huge exposed sections of sinewy muscle for the fire to take. And still the voices clamoured on. It was then my hair caught fire, and my face began to first grow warm, then melt into liquid puddles of pulpy flesh, that I found a new voice, carried on new waves of fresh pain. The flames consumed my entire body, and as I felt myself dying and was ready to give in to the sweet release of death, the car bled its horn as it missed me by a hair. Goddamn asshole city drivers. I was no longer wet, nor on fire, but I was terrified nonetheless. I scanned my surroundings wildly, but saw only a busy street filled with the hustle and bustle of the city's nightlife. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so I took a few seconds to prepare myself for whatever horrible thing might happen next. A footstep next to me made a jerk wildly, and I glanced up to see a large man in a mask staring down at me where I was sitting. That in itself wasn't terrible. What made it much worse was the dark empty tunnel of the gun barrel that was pointed directly at my forehead. The man pulled the hammer back slowly, and when I heard the bullet enter the chamber, I froze. "Please," I breathed, every muscle as taut as wire. "Please, don't kill me." The man's eyes remained locked on mine. His breathing became heavy and ragged, and when he spoke, his voice was deep and gravelly. "Do exactly what I say and I'll let you live." I let out a shaky whimper as he gripped my arm and forced me to my feet, then propelled me into the nearest dark doorway. The next thing I knew, he was on me, then grunting like a beast in heat. The hand with the gun stayed pointed at my head, while the man pushed me down with the other hand onto the hard concrete floor. I struggled to get away, but the icy hands once again gripped me by the shoulders and pinned my legs apart, through the floor somehow, and I found myself powerless to move. The man straddled me then, dripping sweat onto me as he fumbled clumsily for his knife. Almost teasingly, he snapped the blade out, turning it back and forth a few times, so the light caught the silver blade's edge. Then with a few unskilled cuts, he cut through my shirt, my bra and my pants, leaving me only in my underwear, and still the hands held me down, that breathy voice now laughing wickedly in my mind. The man turned the blade, then even as I screamed and fought against the hands that pinned me down, he slid the blade underneath the bottom of my underwear, and with a sudden sharp jerk, he jabbed me lightly with the blade on the inside of my thigh, and I bit back a sob of fear. Then he simply turned the blade again and cut through my underwear, leaving me now fully exposed and powerless to escape. Thankfully I blacked out before the man was done, but the torture and the abuse was something I'd only ever heard or read about in books. I was used several times in several different ways, as the man acted out every one of his depraved fantasies on me, and when he was finally finished and was pulling up his jeans, I looked up at him through swollen eyes from where I lay on the floor, bleeding and bruised, and he returned the look, not one of pity, but of disgust. "You probably liked that, didn't you, you filthy whore?" he growled. Too weak to move, I simply lay there shivering and aching, and he clicked his tongue in disgust. My vision greyed out, even as I felt myself fading, but was brought back swiftly and in sharp relief by the sound of the gun cocking back. I managed to look back at him again, to see that the gun was once more trained on my head. With all my strength, I whispered through battered and cracked lips, You said you wouldn't kill me if I did what you wanted." The man shrugged. I lied. I somehow found the strength to scream once more, squeezing my eyes shut. "No, please, that's enough. I don't want to die anymore." The gunshot was deafening in the tiny room, and I tensed, waiting for the bullet to tear my skull apart. But instead I found myself standing back on the edge of the cliff in the darkness. I was whole, and not naked, or drowned, or burned, but most of all I was alive, and never before in my life had I been so happy to be on solid ground. I stumbled back in relief, sobbing openly again, but with celebration of my life, and felt the familiar and welcome smooth texture of the door of my car. The voice came then from somewhere in the darkness, once more that terrible wrong high-pitched whisper. "You no longer wish to die." Unable to answer, I could only keep my head down. "Tell me now," the voice whispered demandingly. "Will your life become mine? Make the choice." I shook my head back and forth furiously. "No, never. I want to live. I want to live." Sobbing harder, I dropped to my knees, and I felt the icy hand touch me gently on the top of my head. "Then live you shall. But just know that I will always be watching you, and should you ever decide to take your own life again, I will be there, and you will belong to me." The hand drew back. "Now go. Go and never ever come back." I needed no more coaching. I leapt into my car, shoved the key into the ignition, and slammed my foot down on the pedal, spinning my tires wildly as I peeled off in the direction I had come from earlier that night. Now, I have heard some say that their guardian angel saved them, sat on their shoulder, and protected them from some danger. But what about when all the guardian angels are busy? I still say it was a demon that saved my life that night, that pulled me back from my dark thoughts and made me realize that my life is worth it. And who knows? Maybe if someday another one like me happens to feel like their life is as worthless as I thought mine was, maybe they'll find Route 236, and maybe they'll meet her too. And maybe, just maybe, they'll be braver than I was. "Hey, it's CJ, leave me a message," said CJ's pre-recorded voice. Evan huffed with annoyance. I guess it is 2 a.m., he reminded himself. "Hey man," Evan slurred into the phone, lulling slightly onto the ice-cold, foggy glass of his driver's side window. "I know it's late, man, but I'm drunk and I don't know, man. Sadie is having a literal meltdown right now. First of all, she ditched me again, so there's that." Evan gesticulated around as if he were not alone in the cab of his pickup, as if all the billions of snowflakes outside his truck were members of a cold, quiet audience. "All night, bro. All night she texted me non-stop. Evan, I need you. Are you coming out?" Evan took another swig of whiskey, burped a little puke, swallowed it like a champ, and continued. "Blah, blah, blah. Like, she knows I work, right? Girlfriends, man. Just like you said. I don't know. All I know is I'm about halfway through this bottle, and my best friend is home sleeping like a wimp, instead of out here getting drunk with me. Another swig. And just like that, a whole fifth was down. Evan tossed the bottle into the back seat, spilling any residual liquid onto his upholstery. I have no idea where my girlfriend is, Evan concluded. He sat a moment just listening to the static on the other end of the line. He stared blearily out through his fogged windshield. The snow continued to fall, and not a single flake clapped for his performance. Evan cleared his throat suddenly and forced a carefree laugh into his voice. Ha! Anyway, hit me up. Haven't heard from you for like 2 days, bro. Peace out. Evan hung up. He stared at the contact page for CJ on his phone screen. Evan was partly hoping that his best friend would also be awake and drunk, and thus would call him back. He also had no further desire to read through his text conversation with Sadie again, which consisted of over 20 texts from Sadie and lurked just beneath CJ's contact page in glaring red notifications. Her text told him he needed to get to her house now, that she really needed him tonight, and informing him she was in big trouble. Evan had replied with a single text. Just got off, sorry, on my way. 10% battery, said Evan's phone. The warning message covered up Evan's contact picture for CJ. The picture showed Evan and CJ chugging beers at the homecoming game last fall. Evan in his high school band sweater, and CJ in his 1999 St. Louis Rams jersey. Never mind the fact that the Rams were from LA now. And never mind that 1999 was 2 decades ago. CJ loved that jersey more than every other possession he owned. Evan gave his phone a lackadaisical shake. You piece of crap, in response. The screen went black and died. Perfect, he thought. He could not believe that Sadie had acted crazy all night, gotten him to drive out here and ditched him. Regardless, he figured he'd better make sure she hadn't broken an ankle or something. No matter how mad he wasn't going to take the chance that she was out in the winter woods alone. Besides that, he was still kind of hoping to get some. The frigid December air bit into Evan's face as he crunched away from his pickup, which was pulled off the state highway at the intersection with Forest Service Road 6026. He slipped a little on the icy patch of frozen Washington swamp and just avoided tumbling into a slushy ditch. Evan regained his footing and took a second to collect himself. He oriented drunk, meandering thoughts and focused them on the path ahead. After a few deep breaths, he trudged into the pitch black of the forest, up the Forest Service Road about a half a mile, and there was a large wooden sign with bright yellow letters reading, Springbrook Trailhead. Usually Evan would have driven up to the trailhead, making it a much more practical destination. But in late December the road was completely inaccessible to vehicles. All the same, he and Sadie had come out here to be together, rain, snow or shine, for the past 3 months. Pretty much since the day she'd moved to town, she and Evan had been a secretive item, and the 6026 trail had been their secret place. Evan and Sadie, apart from the rest of the world. That night, Evan felt as alone as he ever had. Well, yeah, you broke your promise, thought one part of his head, but she doesn't know that, thought another. It's freaking cold out here. She's been through a lot. I always try to find a place like this, no matter where I end up living or for how long, Sadie said to him about 2 weeks after they'd really started dating. They'd been meeting at the Smithbrook Trail for a month before Sadie had suggested they make their own. Evan agreed and proposed they make a little party clearing where they could hang out. So it was. The next day they were out cutting the barbed wire, envisioning the path from Smithbrook to Sadie's back acre in their heads. By the time they were halfway done, their skin was shredded by thorns and branches, their bodies were sweat-soaked and scented, but their faces were smiling, and Evan finished hacking out some blueberry vines and looked over at her. "What kind of place is that?" Evan asked. A place for secrets, Sadie replied shyly. She looked at him thoughtfully. I really like you, Evan. I want to trust you. But trust doesn't come easy for me. Well, if you need to tell someone about it, I'm here. Evan gave her his best empathetic smile. Sadie approached him. Evan started to sweat even more, his body instinctively reacting to the closeness of a beautiful girl. It was only he and she out there. His body responded in other ways, forcing him to pull his long flannel jacket down over the front of his jeans. Sadie smiled but said nothing. She pulled him from the weeds he was working in and looked into his eyes. A trustworthy guy is the biggest turn-on, you know? She moved his hands from his jacket and unbuttoned it, starting high and working lower. I thought it was like muscles or something, he said, his voice trembling as her fingers brushed over his stomach. I like smart guys, quiet guys. She leaned in to speak into his ear, her breath hot and humid on his blushing skin. I like you, Evan, Sadie said. Before Evan could reply, she pulled his mouth to hers and kissed him. Evan reached the clearing about halfway up the hiking trail. A barbed wire fence separated the Springbrook hiking area's public lands and Sadie's parents' property. The barbed wire was cut, and the path continued through. There were another 600 feet of thick woods before the land turned into a large field. The tame perimeter of manicured suburbia separated Sadie's business-class foster family from the untamable woods surrounding their 3-story home. Evan had always marveled at the large house, but he'd never been inside, even after 3 months of dating Sadie. She wouldn't even talk to him in school unless it was through texts. Tonight, 6026, she texted. Hell yeah, Evan would reply without hesitation. Evan stopped in their clearing where he and Sadie would hang out in full view of the family house, as if to mock it from just out of sight. The well-maintained lawn stretched in a gentle white expanse towards Sadie's foster house's ploughed driveway. The place was entirely dark inside, but for one light. A room on the 2nd story, which Sadie had once pointed to from the clearing. That's my room, she had told him as they cuddled on a large sleeping bag in post-coital bliss. Evan shivering, Sadie sitting totally still and warm, like always. That looks like it'd have nice beds inside, Evan hinted. Too cold for you? Sadie asked, looking at Evan's bare crotch suggestively. He pulled the sleeping bag edge over himself. I don't know how you sit around naked out here, Evan shivered. I was a runaway before foster care, so I have some experience sleeping outside without much on, Sadie said, looking down at her black polished toes. She scooted closer to Evan and put her head on his shoulder. He revelled in her warmth. Sadie never felt cold, ever. Why did you run away from your family? Evan asked after a moment. I didn't. That's just how adults legally referred to homeless kids, so they don't have to say homeless kids, Sadie replied darkly. Evan squeezed her to him and kissed the top of her head softly. I'm sorry, he said. They were quiet for a while. Sadie broke the silence, returning to Evan's earlier question. Kurt is really strict. I mean, like... Nazi strict, I know, Evan said with forced patience. See that Lexus? Sadie asked, looking up at him with what he called her disappointed teacher face. It was a smile, but a smile that implied he was too stupid to see what it really meant. Yeah, Evan said, taking the bait. That's Kurt's. If you ever see it following you around, it means he's found out about us, and he's coming to kill you. Yeah, right, Evan laughed. I'll keep an eye out for him. Sadie didn't laugh. Don't worry, he won't find out. You haven't told anyone, right? Of course not, Evan lied. He'd told his best friend CJ, but CJ wouldn't tell anyone. Evan had to brag to someone about hooking up with a girl as hot as Sadie. Everyone brags about hooking up with their first hot girl, right? It's like you're embarrassed to be with me, Evan said defensively. Sadie frowned at him. I just have to be careful. So your parents are Nazis? What's it got to do with me? Why can't we talk at school even? My foster dad's a Nazi. My parents are dead, Sadie reminded him stiffly. It doesn't have anything to do with you. If we start holding hands at school and skipping to the lunchroom together, the whole town will know by the end of the day. Sadie cast him a commanding final glare, so Evan dropped it like always. They drank in silence for a while until Sadie put on her coat, kissed him and said, If you tell anyone about us, we're through. 'Cause best case scenario, I'm back to being homeless. Or worst case, we're both dead. She gave him another sad, condescending smile, as if he'd never learned anything. He hated that smile. Now standing in the same small copse of trees on the edge of Kurt's property, piss drunk from the bottle of whiskey he'd been slamming into his truck, Evan decided that he didn't care anymore. He was not going to sit around waiting for a girlfriend who treated him like trash and expected him to come to her whenever she needed something, no matter how crappy her life had been before she moved here. He always came way the hell out of here. He always stole her nasty blue rare steaks from work since she wouldn't eat them otherwise, and he was always the one who had to break the law and procure the alcohol. Sadie liked to brag about how she'd stolen from gas stations in 7 different states. Now that she had Evan around, it was his turn to break the law, his turn to risk an MIP, and his turn to lose his job over too many undercooked steaks gone missing. Of course Evan would never bring that up because he wasn't an asshole. He was a good boyfriend. That's why Sadie had told him those traumatic facts about her past. He never used her baggage against her, even when he wanted to. Didn't that make him better than the other guys? CJ was a dick to his girlfriend all the time, but she always held his hand in public, like she was proud to be with him. If Evan even looked at Sadie in public, she would just look down at her combat boots and walk off, like she didn't notice. Evan wondered why the hell he put up with her. Then she texted him, 6026. Evan usually answered, hell yeah, or something like it, and drove 2 hours straight over. He'd text her one more time from the state highway and meet her at the clearing between the public trail and her house. She'd sneak out of that second-story window, across the vast field, and come out to meet him for their nighttime revels. Booze, sex, and free food he'd brought from his closing shift in the kitchen. Evan wondered what he'd done wrong. I hope CJ didn't tell anyone. Maybe her foster dad had found out. The Lexus was in the driveway. There was no indication that anyone had walked out to the trail that night. It had snowed all day. If anyone had walked out since midnight, there would have been a clear trail. The house was dark, but for Sadie's room. By the frantic tone and frequency of her texts that night, she really seemed to be in trouble. Usually Sadie hated texting, but it would just be that one text, 6026 or tonight, ? That evening. And she'd actually gotten angry at his lack of replies. If Sadie's mad at you, she doesn't talk. She's in trouble. She just pretends you don't exist. See that Lexus? Evan decided to take his chances. Tonight he was finally going to Sadie's house, whether he was going to rescue her from the wrath of her step-Nazi Kurt, or to simply sneak in, deliver the steaks, talk to her about whatever was wrong, and hopefully get some. Either way, Evan was a good boyfriend, and he was going to prove it. His footprints carved a straight path through the snow from the tree line, accompanied only by a small drip trail of blood and grease which had begun to leak through the paper to-go bag he'd stolen from the buffet. As he approached the house, he noticed another set of footprints. They trod freshly up the driveway from the Lexus to Sadie's sizable black door, oaken and heavy, swinging ajar. Evan's gut turned and his head swam violently, partly because he was very drunk, but only partly. Just inside, the house looked like a massacre. Blood was spattered on the walls, floor and ceiling, still oozing down and dripping from the latter surfaces to the pool on the former. The bag of bleeding rest eggs dropped from Evan's nerveless fingers, forgotten to plunk into the snow. Evan looked to his phone to check Sadie's final texts and to call 911. The phone reminded him that it was dead and quite incapable of calling anything. She begged me to come out here. She needs me, he assured himself before slowly approaching the doorway. Evan peered into the doorway. The house was unlit, but the white walls were bright with red, and a clear blood trail led down the hallway and through a large entryway to the left, which looked to be a den. Evan ducked down as if he were stealthier that way, and crept around the house's east side. He neared a large bay window into which the moon was shining. Evan peeked around the edge of the window frame into a lavishly decorated, white-carpeted den with expensive-looking vases, furniture and lamps. Behind one of the expensive couches was a large shape. It looked like a pile of dirty laundry in the dimly lit room. Evan slithered out in front of the window, looking everywhere in the room for a sign of movement, or a shadow, or a businessman named Kurt, covered in Sadie's blood and drinking scotch on the large leather rocking chair. No one was on the rocking chair, nor the sofa, nor any of the furniture. A pile of eviscerated flesh, jagged jutting bones, steaming fluids and meat which had once been a person was lying on the floor. It took Evan nearly a full minute of looking at the pile before you could tell it was a human corpse. He finally put it all together when he saw the lower half of a slack-clad leg and a foot still in a black business loafer. Evan vomited, spraying bile, whiskey and buffet food all over the bay window, and he took off. He stumbled through the knee-high snow, legs pumping high and desperate to sprint back across that lawn towards the tree line. His imagination ran even faster, as a million thoughts swirled around in his head, churning together in his panicked mind. That was a foot. Don't slip, don't fall. That was a corpse. Where's Sadie? That was a massacre. What the hell? Run. Is that Sadie? Please let it be Sadie. Run. It was Sadie. She was leaning against their favorite tree, just inside the tree line. She seemed to be wearing a large t-shirt and nothing else. Even from halfway across the vast lawn, he could see that she was covered in red stains. He ran even faster, desperate to feel the heat of her against him, to feel the warmth of her breath and skin, to feel her chest rising, proving she was alive. When he got close enough to really see her, he stopped dead. He felt frozen, paralyzed in the snow, like a rabbit watching the hawk swoop in. "Sadie, are you all right?" Evan asked. "You're late, Evan," Sadie said sternly. "What the hell is going on here? Are you bleeding?" Evan didn't immediately recognize the t-shirt for what it was. It was a jersey, blood-stained and desecrated. The dark blue looked black in the shadows of the forest, but the gold lettering still stood out with some help from the moon. Evan couldn't read the small serif font letters from where he was, but he didn't need to. The letters were stitched over a large number 13. It was CJ's favorite number, since it had been Kurt Warner's number when he'd been quarterback for the 99 St. Louis Rams. 3 narrow, jagged slashes sliced directly through the proud number, flashing glimpses of Sadie's pale, naked skin below. He had been right about one thing. All she was wearing was the jersey, unless you counted the blood which painted her in splatters and splotches from head to toe. "Where did you get that?" Evan asked. His tone had gone shaky with terror. He shivered from the cold, but not only from the cold. "I hung out with CJ Friday," she answered simply. "Why?" Evan asked, certain he didn't want to know the answer. Sure, he wanted to get the hell out of here. "He approached me in school the other day." She started stalking towards him, stepping out of the dark forest and into the bright open field where the moon's blue light reflected off an uninterrupted plain of bright white snow. "Is she taller?" "I think it's pretty cool you two are dating," Sadie said in an eerily close imitation of Evan's best friend. She threw him one of CJ's trademark winks. "Don't worry, I'll keep it on the DL." "Where is he?" Evan asked. He had to know, despite his screaming instincts, urging him to get the hell out of there. She simply gestured back towards her house. "He's in there with Kurt," she said. Evan fixated on her blood-soaked hair and skin, on the jersey blowing in ragged tatters from her thin form, on her bare feet trotting in red prints into the snow as she stalked closer and closer. Evan knew that walk. He'd hunted with his father enough times. It was the even, assured gait of the victorious predator, delivering death to the enfeebled quarry. Evan noticed her fingernails for the first time. They were black, but not from her usual nail polish. They looked hard, extended to points, and unnaturally long. Her toenails, too, looked longer and hooked like talons. The worst was her eyes, glinting pale green from scotopic irises. Evan noticed for the first time that her lips were stained with blood. It glistened wetly and puffed out with her breath as she exhaled into the brisk December air. "Sadie, you're bleeding," Evan said, as if he could attribute everything he'd seen in the past 2 days to that fact alone. "I'm not bleeding, Evan," she stated, matter-of-factly. "Okay, well, I don't know what's happening, but we can get help. We just need to get to my pickup, and I'll take you to the hospital, and everything will be fine. I have to help myself, Evan, because you broke your promise. I'm not surprised. Everyone does. Just one time I'd like to see what it's like to leave without a trace." She shrugged as if it was a hopeless dream, and continued approaching him with that same lethally steady pace. "What are you talking about, Sadie?" Evan lost his cool, either by some desperate need to understand his final circumstances, or by some activation of residual liquid courage. He screamed at her. "Stay the hell away from me!" He started backing up, stumbled a bit in the deep snow, and immediately bounced back to his feet, continuing clumsily back. "What the hell happened in that house? And where the hell is my best friend?" Evan backed away and to the side, hoping he could skirt around her for a clear shot into the forest. She walked straight ahead, her now inhuman gaze fixed on him with the singular focus of a born predator. Now he could see the whites of her teeth gleaming from beneath a veneer of viscous, coppery red. They looked pointy and sharp. "I think you know the answers to those questions," she said, chiding him. "I really needed you here tonight, Evan." Evan simply continued to back away, casting what he hoped were inconspicuous glances towards the cut barbed wire fence and the trail beyond. "It was only supposed to be you and me. Now I need to know who else you told about us." "No, nobody, just CJ. And he won't—" "No, he won't. Neither will Kurt, though I didn't expect him home tonight." She shrugged another hopeless circumstance, nothing for it. Evan had started crying, desperately salty tears tracing cold lines down his reddening cheeks to mingle with the lingering vomit on his chin. His throat ached from clenching tight, his teeth chattered, and his hands shook. His leg muscles quivered in anticipation of what he was about to do. "Do your parents know?" she asked, only 20 feet away now. No, Evan choked. Sadie nodded, satisfied. Your brother? She arched an eyebrow at him. Evan couldn't force himself to answer. He focused instead on forcing himself to run. He ran with all the force of his entire will to live, powered by a surge of primitive energy as old as the need to eat. Evan and Sadie, apart from the rest of the world. Sadie was a much faster runner. The day had started so well. Despite being exhausted from last night's travels, I was full of energy. Once I had awoke, I began the morning with a productive spark. Scrambled eggs and toast for breakfast. Wash face, brush teeth, shower, get dressed, and I was ready to go. I left the house with a smile on my face, embracing the new mountain air. I'd arrived in this country for the first time last night, and I couldn't have looked more of a tourist. My pasty white skin and doggy-box dyed hair. Needless to say, I attracted several judgmental looks on my hike that morning, but I didn't mind. I was headed for a rocky mountain about 3 miles from my rented accommodation. This was going to be a brilliant hike, I remember thinking. Now my family and friends resent my lifestyle. Not because I like hiking, but rather because I always travel alone. Sure, I've encountered my fair share of weirdos and experiences that could have gone terribly wrong, but they've always sorted themselves out. I try not to focus on the negative things in life, and I have hope left in humanity still. The 3 miles to get to the mountains were a walk in the park for me. Walking had become a huge hobby, and it had done my body some good. Soon enough I began my trek up the mountain. The sun scorched my face, and I wasn't used to the Mediterranean sun, so I told myself I would have to stop soon to reapply sun cream. I reached for my bag, only to be groping my back instead. Where was my bag? I swear I remembered taking it with me. I stood there for a moment, questioning my next plan of action. Did I really have to walk back to my accommodation? Screw it, I thought. I'll be fine without it. It's only sun cream. The mountain trail seemed desolate. The path I took to get there was swarming with dog walkers and joggers. I didn't understand why no one was here, but soon my mind washed away with any thoughts I had, and I felt at peace. The sun's rays kissing my pale skin. I didn't care no one else was here. I was going to enjoy my hike, alone. That was until I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like someone was running, except they were scrambling and frantic. Alarm bells didn't go off at first, however, but this person started screaming and pointing once he'd seen me. This guy could be a nutcase and no one else is here. Fight or flight kicked in as the man drew closer, and I made a run for it. What else could I do? Thoughts spun around my head as my feet took me further and further from this man. What if he was a murderer or a junkie? I didn't dare look behind me for fear I was still being chased. My heart racing and my head getting light from the intense sun. Only adrenaline kept me pushing at that point. I was running for my life until I tripped and my body launched forward. My foot was caught in a firm grasp of rocks. Typical white girl movie crap, I know. I felt a searing pain shoot up my leg, and winced but dared not scream. Still in fear for my life, I ripped my shirt and wedged the cloth into my dry mouth to conceal the torture I felt. I am not dying today. I could no longer hear or see the man. Had he lost me? Had he given up? I waited in agonizing anticipation for something to happen. Anything. I lay there sweating for too long, and time had become irrelevant. I was focusing on staying alive now. In the distance, perhaps 100 meters away or so, I saw a cluster of men dragging a large object across the rocky surface of the hill. I wasn't sure if this was real or not at first. A cruel hallucination, maybe. My vision was hazy from the sun, but I noticed it was big and long. It took me a minute to focus, but then it hit me. It was a person. No, him. It was that man that was chasing me. My sight wasn't at its best, but it was undoubtedly him now, and focusing harder I noticed the men pulling him away. There were about 8 of them. They were tall, really tall, too tall. Damn, I need to get out of here, was the only thing I thought in that moment. I was stuck. My foot had to be broken, and there are some murderous creatures killing people less than 100 meters from me. Doubt began to take over, and I had to be realistic. The odds of me getting out alive were still slim. I laid back flat on the ground and closed my eyes. That man was shouting at me. He needed help. He was definitely trying to escape those men. Why else would he be so frantic? He could have been trying to warn you, I thought. Whatever way I thought about it, I came to an inevitable conclusion. He was dead because of me, because of my ignorance, and because of me jumping to conclusions. If it wasn't for you, that poor man would still be alive, or free if he wasn't dead already, and you wouldn't be in a death trap. If those men don't take you, the sun will, or some wild animal. Either way, you're going to die. Now I understand why no one used this trail. There is a monster inside of me. I can feel its teeth clamping down in my mind, gorging itself on my most secret thoughts, my deepest desires and my strongest hopes. It feeds on my every happy thought, my every inkling of good things, my hopeful wishes for something better, and it's getting stronger. I've watched the show Monsters Inside Me on occasion. Definitely some pretty gross stuff. And those people are always in awe and horrified by what odd creatures are pulled from their bodies. But that's the difference between them and me. They get to see their monsters at the end. They get to have them removed from their persons, gone from existence like their monsters never were. I can't. And believe me, I've tried. I only get to see my monster in the mirror, usually at the end of a long day, when the weight of the world has slumped my shoulders and my back aches from the responsibilities of the day-to-day. Never is it clearer than when I can see it through my own eyes, this monster of mine. And it is at times such as these when I wonder once more how much longer I can keep going on this way. See, I've had this monster in my mind for years now. It visited frequently throughout my childhood, and finally moved in for good right around the time my deadbeat father packed up his stuff and left me to my mother's abuse. I've fed it since then, nurtured it, helped it grow from a tiny little imperceptible being to a beast of unfathomable proportions. It's been getting stronger every day, and I feed it still. And some days it is hungrier than others. Some days I can let it go hungry for a while, and while its belly and throat both grumble deep in my mind, there is nothing it can do. At the end of the day, I have persevered. But then there are other days when I am so weak from my monster's wrath that I can barely leave my bed. Days when I can't eat, when I can't sleep. And I'll say this with no shred of doubt in my mind. There are now quite a few more other days than some days. I feel it stirring again in there, even as I write this. It's waking up, slowly uncurling its sharp claws, rippling its slimy segmented body, and yawning its huge fanged maw wide. It will probably want to eat again, and I will most likely give it what it wants. These days it's easier on me if I just give in. Sometimes I wonder what my monster looks like. I wonder what its final form would be. And I wonder how long I can keep it at bay before it takes me over completely. The speeches don't help. The little crap mantras that overpriced and overcoiffed women I see every Wednesday at her opulent office told me to recite to keep the monster back. The medicines don't help. They only make my monster angry. And I don't like it when it gets angry. Last time I couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. I even at one point made an honest effort to go out and meet others with monsters like mine. But all of our monsters together in the same area only kicked their torturous methods into overdrive. Take Jake Booker from my science class, for instance. His monster is a lot more vicious than mine. I got to see it last week when it attacked him in public. He was on the ground, screaming and crying that he couldn't breathe and grabbing his chest. He made it to the hospital for treatment, but his monster must have been extremely upset about it, because Jake hung himself with his sheet 46 hours after they moved him to the 7th floor. Evidently he wouldn't stop begging the nurses and doctors to just let him die already, and they decided he should be on suicide watch. But they didn't do a very good job. Poor Jake. And Amy Flynn, from that little bookstore down in Jerry. Such a sweet girl, most of the time. But her monster got the better of her early. She went and laid down on the Crow Line railroad tracks 2 months ago after drowning a fifth of Jim. Head on one side, knees on the other. From what I heard, her fiancé Peter had left her for an 18-year-old smut from Caprinat after 15 long years and 3 kids together. I guess she took it pretty hard. They said afterwards that her funeral was a closed casket because they couldn't fix the damage to her head and face. Poor Amy. And Carol Bridget from next door. She didn't get off as easy as Jake and Amy did. Oh no. She didn't get to be free of her monster. Her monster attacked her husband of 30 years instead of her, buried a butcher knife in between his shoulder blades whilst he was watching the game, and severed his spinal cord. She was sorry afterwards, they always are, but her regret couldn't change what her monster had done. I watched her trial on live stream. She told the jury that the voices had made her do it. It's a damn shame I was the only one that believed her. Poor Carol. I know it's only a matter of time before my monster gets me too. I'm just not as strong as I used to be these days. And frankly, I don't really want to be strong anymore. And maybe if I'm lucky, the day will come soon when it finally finishes me off and I won't have to fight it anymore. No more expensive weekly talks to the pretender. No more useless medicines. No more crappy half-assed excuses why I can't go to work or hang out with my friends. No more trying. And my God, how I look forward to that day, because I am so tired. They were right about one thing, though. Never mind the monsters that can be seen. Those are the easy ones to get rid of. It's the monsters inside that one can't see, the ones that live in one's head and influence one's every happy thought. That can be more dangerous. Whore, baby killer. The horrible names they called her, and their cold, piercing stares remained burned in her brain, playing over and over in her head on repeat. When she was in class, when she was at her locker, when she was in the bathroom, there was nowhere safe. Even the teachers at St. Mary's seemed to follow her with their eyes when she was in the hallways, standing at the threshold of their classrooms, with their arms crossed, looking down on her. The librarian scanned her books a little slower than she did the rest of the students. The lunch lady splattered her mashed potatoes onto her tray with a little more apathy than she did the rest of the lunch line. Even the creepy old janitor, who the children had given the nickname Old Man Frankenstein, due to his limp leg that dragged behind him as he walked, seemed to stare at Stacy deeply whenever they crossed paths. And she could read their thoughts. They were all the same. That's the girl who had an abortion. But it was on a cold, snowy day in February that a series of events were put in motion that would change the lives of everyone at St. Mary's forever. The day started out quieter than most, due to the blizzard outside. Many of the students had decided to stay home, wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping hot chocolate, and letting thoughts of tests and grades take a back seat to the pleasures of daytime television. But in the hallways of St. Mary's, those who were forced to attend their classes that day did so with heavy feet and little patience. Stacy walked towards her chemistry class, her books close to her chest and her eyes on the floor. This way she could protect her books from being swatted while avoiding the rows of eyeballs lit up on each side of her like lights on an airport runway. If Stacy had been looking straight ahead, she may have seen the three girls approaching, with Stacy dead in their sights. It was Tori, honor student and captain of the senior girls' volleyball team, and her sidekicks Sarah and Veronica. Knowing how the girls felt about her, Stacy would have perhaps avoided the brash shoulder that came her way when Tori blew past. "Watch it, slut," said Tori. Books fell to the floor. A group of kids, boy and girl alike, started to gather around them with grins on their faces. Sarah and Veronica were showing teeth, and Stacy kept her eyes on the floor, knelt down and started to pick up her books. "Real mature, Tori," said a boy from the crowd. Stacy was surprised to look up, and of all people see Logan Davis coming to her defense. They never talked. Stacy didn't know he knew she existed. He was a popular hockey player, and she was just Stacy. Naive, stupid Stacy. He knelt down beside her and helped her gather her books. The crowd disbanded. Tori and her sidekicks walked on. "Hey, grade 11 math. I'm in that class too," he said. Stacy pulled herself from the floor and looked up to see Logan's well-chiseled face and beaming blue eyes gazing back at her. She hated jocks, but always thought Logan was something different. He was kind. You could see it in his smile. A smile will get you every time, she thought to herself, but she remained cool as ice. Yeah, I know." "Don't mind Tori," he said as they got to their feet and handed back her textbook. "She can be a real devil sometimes." "Thanks," said Stacy, tucking her hair behind her ear before returning to a double-handed squeeze on her books. "Can I walk you to class?" Logan asked. Stacy almost didn't understand the question. Yeah, sure, thanks." As they walked, Stacy could once again feel the stairs burning a hole through her back. This time, though, they were all thinking about something else. They were thinking the same thing Stacy was thinking. What is Logan doing walking with her? Logan didn't seem to notice. Stacy guessed he must be used to it. He got looked at a lot, too. "Today's the first playoff game for the hockey team," he said as they went. "I play on the hockey team." Stacy couldn't help but roll her eyes and grin ever so slightly. "I know, you're wearing the team jacket." He looked down at his red Letterman. "Oh yeah," he chuckled. "You ever come watch?" She told him she hadn't, but that was a lie. She had been to a game once before with Steve, the night that changed her life forever. Steve had snuck in a small flask of vodka, and they passed it back and forth, high up in the stands. To keep warm, he said. But by the third period, the contents of the flask was gone, and so were they. Going back to Steve's car seemed harmless. The back seat seemed exciting. But 3 weeks later it all came crashing down, and everyone knew Stacy's name after that. The girl who aborted her baby. The family cast out. The friendless, the unloved. And as for her babysitting career, the one thing she actually enjoyed in her dismal teenage years, now no one in town was about to hire a baby killer to look over their precious gifts from God while they were away. "You should come," said Logan, breaking her from her trance. The invite stunned her. Every fibre of her being told her to say no. But that smile of his, those kind blue eyes, there really was something different about him, Stacy thought. "Sure," she said. And for the first time in a long time, Stacy smiled. At lunch, Stacy would eat her sandwich and fruit in the boiler room below the school. For one thing, it was far the warmest place in the institution, in what was one of the coldest winters in years. And for another, it let her eat in peace. There was no one watching, no one pointing or snickering. Having people stare at you while you eat is like having people stare at you while you pee, she thought. It's perverted. It was nice and quiet down there, with the exception of the whoosh from the water pipes and the random hisses and clanks that always followed. Even the reject sounds of the school found their way down to the boiler room for a little escape from the busybodies above. Their sporadic company gave Stacy comfort and put her at ease. Warm and quiet, just the way Stacy liked it. As she drained the small carton of its last drops of chocolate milk, she heard the faint jingling of keys. Then came silence for a moment, before the jingle of keys returned once again, only louder this time. The jingles soon were accompanied by a gritty scraping sound, like something heavy dragging on the floor. Someone was coming. Stacy's first instinct was to hide behind the boiler, but she had burned herself on it first time down, and didn't want to live through the pain again. Before she could think of another plan, a figure, hunched over and pale, emerged from behind a row of pipes. Old Man Frankenstein. Surprisingly, Stacy was relieved it was him. At least he was harmless. The principal, on the other hand, was just looking for a way to suspend her from school. So she relaxed and went back to her sandwich. "What are you doing down here?" he grunted. He pointed at her with a wrench in his hand, his limp leg dragging behind him. "Eating my lunch," Stacy replied simply. "Well, I can see that," said the custodian, not very amused at her reply. "You're not supposed to be down here. It's dangerous. What's wrong with the cafeteria?" "It's even more dangerous for me up there." Deciding to carry on with his business anyhow, Old Man Frankenstein headed to a long vertical pipe near the boiler, grunting as he went, muttering something Stacy couldn't understand. "Besides," Stacy said, "it's nice down here." "It's too damn hot." Stacy watched the old man struggle to turn the valve on the pipe. After some harsh coughs and some sweat, he managed to get it going. Stacy's first instinct was to applaud the man, but she was still holding her sandwich. "I don't know. I like it," she said. The old man spun his head around and yelled at her. "Now I'm serious. You can be badly hurt down here. You need to get gone, you hear?" Stacy didn't budge. "I know. I burnt myself pretty bad on that boiler." She pointed to the mammoth metal keg barrel casing, with all its dials, valves, and industrial bolts. "That thing'll get ya," he said, as he retreated back to his pipe. "You're damn right. That thing will burn your face clean off." What a strange thing to say, Stacy thought. "You're not going to tell on me, are you?" she asked, swallowing a mouthful of PB&J. "How come you ain't scared of me like the rest of those students?" he asked her abruptly. "Why would I be?" she said, wishing she had have made that carton of milk last a little bit longer. Peanut butter was sticking to the back of her throat. "Most of you are. I hear what they call me. Old Man Frankenstein. They look at me like I'm some kind of freak show." "Are you?" "Most underpaid freak show in all the land, then, I suppose." "I know what it's like, you know," Stacy said. "To be looked at like a freak show." "Is that why you're down here?" Stacy nodded, biting into her sandwich. "And what makes you so scary?" he asked. "You don't look that scary to me." Stacy was surprised he hadn't heard. What's one more, she thought. "I had an abortion," she told him. He stared at her for a moment, the same way he would stare when they passed each other in the halls. Then he snorted and shook his head, as if a fly had flown in his face, suddenly becoming stern. "If you ask me, you're all too young for that kind of stuff. Now you're gonna ruin your life acting like that, you hear me?" Stacy immediately regretted opening up to him and shoved what little of her sandwich was left into her lunch bag. "Forget it, never mind. I'll leave you to your precious boiler room." She put her lunch bag in her knapsack and threw it over her shoulder, hurrying past the old man. "Wait," he said. But it was too late. Stacy was gone. She could see her breath. Stacy sat in the chilly sands of the hockey rink, blowing into her fists, yearning for the radiating heat of the boiler room. But when Logan skated onto the ice and waved up to her, she felt herself warming up pretty quickly. A few rows to her left, sitting behind the visitor net, Tori and her sidekicks, Sarah and Veronica, were sitting with some of the football team, watching the game. Tori had been cheering Logan on as his shift took the ice, but when she saw how he waved to Stacy, her cheer turned to a scowl, and her focus shifted from the game to a different type of competition. Stacy pretended she didn't notice, but seeing Tori in such a state put a smile on her face that she just couldn't get rid of. Stacy kept her eyes on Logan, amazed at his athleticism. His speed and grace made the other team look slow and sluggish by comparison. Stacy could hear his blade scraping into the ice as he zigged and zagged through the other team, and then with the grace of a ballerina, spun around a defenseman and let off a hammering slap shot that whizzed right over the goalie's shoulder and exploded into the mesh of the top corner. The crowd cheered. Stacy cheered. Stacy was one of the crowd. After the game, Stacy waited for Logan at the hot chocolate counter like he had asked, her heart racing as if she had been out there on the ice herself. When he came out from the changing room, wearing that red Letterman, hockey bag hanging off his shoulder, and a grin that showed off his dimples, aimed right at her, she felt a tingle in her belly. She hadn't felt that tingle in a long time. She wouldn't allow herself to. Not after Steve. But Logan's not like Steve, she lectured herself. Logan's different. "Glad you came," he said as he approached. He was moving slower now. He put his elbow on the counter and leaned. "How was your first hockey experience?" Stacy relaxed. "A little frigid, but not bad. Maybe we can get you warmed up. A few of us are going to Pint's to bowl some games. Jerry's got a fake ID. We can get pictures." He motioned behind him to the group of kids by the arcade game, more Letterman jackets and a group of girls, including Tori, Sarah, and Veronica. "Thanks, but I should probably be getting home. I have to babysit my little brother." Stacy didn't have a little brother, but it rolled off the tongue pretty smoothly. Logan understood. "Okay, well, see you in math, I guess. Thanks for coming." Stacy watched him jog back over to the group, who seemed relieved he was coming back alone. Everyone piled out of the rink, except for Tori, who hung back and waited until her friends were outside before she walked over to Stacy and said, "You know he's just paying you attention because he knows you're an easy lay, right?" Tori left her alone with that thought and walked away with a satisfied smile on her face. Stacy sat in the boiler room, finishing the last of her sandwich, when the old custodian limped out from a set of pipes, his one leg dragging behind. But she knew he was coming. She heard those keys jingling a mile away. This time he didn't look upset to be seeing her, nor did he break into a lecture about why she shouldn't be down there. He just went about his business like she wasn't even there. Stacy wondered why that seemed so odd to her, and then realized that she could not remember the last time someone ignored her presence. She was almost offended by it. "Come to give me more lectures?" she asked, watching him fiddle with the wrench on some bolts. He shook his head a bit, but said nothing, focused hard on the bolt lodged into the grip of his wrench. "Are you tightening or loosening?" she asked, now a spectator at the event. "Tightening," he coughed back between grunts. Stacy nodded as if impressed at his answer. "I'm more of a loosener myself, but that's just me." The custodian gave up on the bolt, took a big breath out and rubbed the wrinkles on his forehead. "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not really doing anything. This bolt doesn't need to be tightened. He kept his eyes on the floor, almost embarrassed to look up. "I just want to say I'm sorry. I shouldn't have talked to you like that. Anyway, that's all I've come to say. Enjoy your lunch." He turned away and headed for the exit. Stacy called out to him, feeling guilty for instigating. "Wait, you don't have to go just yet. You can chill." He stopped and grinned, which made the lines on the side of his face curl and crease. "Chill? In the boiler room? Fine choice of words, kid." "I'm sure you're not that busy. Come chill, keep me company." "I don't think that's allowed," he grunted. Stacy was having fun with him now. "Come on, do you seriously want me to only know you as Old Man Frankenstein? What's your name? Do you prefer dude or sir?" "My name's Will," he said. "And what's yours besides Sad Lonely Girl?" "Sad Lonely Girl. I like that. My name is Stacy, as in, did you hear, Stacy had an abortion, and other famous phrases." He raised his wrinkled palm. "Stacy will be just fine. Don't have to add all that now." Stacy liked Will right away. It was nice to have someone to joke with. You don't realize how much you miss the little social interactions when you're isolated, even a thing as simple as joking around. And she knew it was probably just as nice for Will to have someone to talk to as well. She asked him about his limp, how he got it and where. He told her it was a war injury from his tour in Vietnam. Stacy was amazed and felt embarrassed and ashamed that she used to see this man as just a creepy old grump. People are so easy to judge and vilify from afar. It's only when you get close do you see that we're all just human beings. We all have stories, good ones and bad. He asked her if she was ever planning on eating in the cafeteria again. "I'm actually thinking about bringing a bed and a TV down here and just moving in. Stay here forever," she said slyly. His expression was flat. "This is not a place for a young lady." "Well, it's safer down here, trust me." He paused to collect some thoughts. "You have any kids?" Stacy asked him. Will bowed his head and said, "I do, a daughter, somewhere out there. You actually remind me of her quite a bit." "Somewhere out there? What, is she, like, in the Navy or something?" "Her mother took her from me. The war messed my head up, something awful. I came back a darker person. It's probably better this way." "That's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. If it makes you feel any better, it kind of helps to hear how I'm not the only person who has it rough. Puts things into perspective, you know? Our past makes us what we are, but we have the power to choose what that is," he said. "Like, learn from it, or let the loneliness, shame, and hatred consume you kind of thing." He seemed almost entertained. "In so many words." "Well, take your own advice, dude. Do we settle on sir or dude? Go see your daughter. Be less dark." "It's your daughter. You're supposed to do anything for your daughter. You would sail the seas for her. You would kill for her." Her momentum halted. "Sorry," she said, deflated. "It's none of my business. But it would probably mean the world to her too." Will, who looked a lot less like Frankenstein and a lot more human-like, beat the wrench softly on his palm, then turned around and slowly limped away, the one leg dragging behind, scraping on the concrete. She felt she overstepped, but maybe, she hoped, her words might have helped him out in some way. It seemed like they got through. Stacy stayed a while longer and listened to the wish-washing of the pipes. If she closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the boiler radiating on her skin, she could pretend, if only for a moment, that she was on a deserted beach somewhere, lying in the sand, watching a sunset and listening to the waves crash in and out. She could escape from this cold, cold winter at last. Then she packed her things and headed for the stairwell. When she turned the corner into the corridor, she ran smack into the brick wall that was Logan Davis. Before she stepped back and saw his face, she saw the LD embroidered on the breast of his red letterman. "Logan, what are you doing here?" he grinned. "So this is where you're eating your lunches now. I just saw old man Frankenstein come up from here. He wasn't groping you, was he?" "No." "Good," said Logan. He put his hand on her waist and pulled her close. "That's my job." He leaned in for a kiss. Stacy turned her head. "Stop it, Logan. I need to get to class." He squeezed her tighter. "Come on, Stacy. I know you like me. You can spare a few minutes." She tried to press herself off him, but he was squeezing too tight. "I'm serious, Logan. Let me go." He kept going. "I know you want it, Stacy. I know you like to do it." Stacy managed to wiggle an arm free, wound up and smacked Logan hard across the cheek. He let go of her immediately and grabbed the side of his face, which was quickly turning red. "You bitch," he cried out. "What the hell is wrong with you, huh? You some kind of dyke or something? You'd rather be down here with Frankenstein." "His name's not Frankenstein, okay? It's Will. And don't you ever touch me again, you jerk. Or I'll have your name in the papers, and it won't be for scoring a stupid goal." She pushed past him and ran up the stairs. Stacy never ended up going to class. Instead, she locked herself in a bathroom stall and cried. "I heard you and old man Frankenstein got it on in the boiler room," teased Tori, when Stacy passed her in the halls the next day. "I know you like older guys, Stacy, but wow," giggled Sarah. "Someone tell Rick James there's a new super freak in town," laughed Veronica. Stacy kept on her way, paying them no mind, but it was clear that the atmosphere around her had changed. The students were still staring, that much was the same. But now instead of scowls and resentment, it was giggles and smiles. Not welcoming smiles, but patronizing ones, humiliating ones. She heard whispers as she walked, and Stacy put her head down and picked up her pace. The stares and laughs were coming from all around her now. It was suffocating. She needed to get somewhere safe, quick. "I heard you made out with the janitor," said one of the boys from the football team as she turned a corner. Stacy's teeth clenched and her fists tightened. She was furious. Not just at the students who were so eager to gang up on her and strip her of any little dignity she had left, but at herself for thinking Logan was anything different from the other high school boy. A liar and a jerk, that's all Logan was. She was determined to let him know just how she felt about him the second she saw him in the math class that day. If he thought that slap in the face was bad, he was in for a rude awakening. But when she got to math class, Logan's desk was empty. Stacy didn't eat lunch in the boiler room that day. She didn't want to give the student body any more ammunition. But if she had, she would have found a body, sprawled out next to the boiler in a red Letterman jacket, the face unrecognizable from all the bubbles and scars that had disfigured the skin when his face was pressed against the steaming keg barrel. Pieces of flesh and blood were still dissolving on the hot metal surface, though as Stacy turned the body over and looked at the initials embroidered on the red Letterman jacket, she would have seen the letters LD, and beside the body she would have seen a discarded wrench, stained in what looked to be crimson paint, and a pair of footprints in the same shiny crimson shade, leading away from the pool of blood. One of the shoe prints was normal and defined, and the other was shapeless and streaked, like a limp leg dragging behind, scraping on the concrete. This story takes place in the Rocky Mountains just south of Silver Plume, Colorado. It was the start of an evening on the 14th of August, 2018, and more strange reoccurrences would happen the following couple of nights. So that day, a couple of neighbors of ours had gone hiking along the ridgeline of Leavenworth Mountain just south of town, and I had arranged to meet them up there later that afternoon. My plan was to rendezvous with them in the early evening and hang out until after the sun had set. You see, that night was the peak of the Perseid meteor shower, and it was forecast to be especially spectacular as the moon would be a barely thin crescent and wouldn't obscure the clear dark skies. So I set off on my way with a small pack with limited supplies, as I was going to be relatively close to home. I had a small camelback with a litre or two of water, a rock hammer and a hatchet, and my new green laser that I was hoping would add more good time viewing to the night's light show. I'd set off a bit later than planned, and the main trails to the top consisted of a series of long and winding switchbacks, so I decided to cut some time by bushwhacking straight up the mountain to meet my friends. However, my plan backfired, as I found myself being slowed down by steeper than anticipated inclines, slippery rock tailings and sheer cliffs. Unfortunately, the cell service is spotty at best in that area, and I was unable to contact my friends until finally reaching the summit around sunset. After a few attempts, I finally got connected to my pals via text, and to my surprise, I'd learned that they had already hiked back down into town, as it was starting to get dark. I told them no problem, as I had planned to stay at the top of the mountain until late anyway, so I could count the meteors, and maybe they could join me later. They said they were pretty beat from the day's trek, but would let me know after they'd rested a bit and had some dinner, if they thought they'd make it back out. This new arrangement was perfectly fine with me. Being the consummate night owl, and having lived in this area for 5+ years, most of my excursions into the mountains tended to be nocturnal, and I'd spent many a night, some planned, some not, getting along just fine in these precarious mountains, and usually had very little anxieties in doing so. So in this manner I made my way down the ridgeline of Leavenworth to a locally known camping area, Pavilion Point, which from its high vantage point overlooked both Silver Plume and the neighbouring town of Georgetown. In between the two small towns, approximately 2 to 3 miles apart, was an old railroad attraction called the Georgetown Loop. I should also mention now that at this time there was a strict fire ban in effect, and that this summer was probably the driest I'd experienced since moving to Colorado back in 2013. There were also several wildfires wreaking havoc in the state, requiring all available emergency resources, and failing to adhere to the fire ban was taken very seriously with fines ranging in the thousands of dollars. But that being said, I hadn't planned on having a campfire for the obvious reasons. After settling into a comfortable spot near Pavilion Point, I kicked back and started counting the fireballs. By 9 or 10 p.m, my friend let me know they wouldn't be making it back up the mountain, and to enjoy the show, and that maybe he would join me the following night. Over the next hour or two, I had counted close to 100 meteors, ranging from quick zips to bright fireballs that would leave these awesome streaks that temporarily froze in the skyline. I was having a blast, and as the novelty was finally starting to wear off, I began hearing some faint noises and rustling about in the darkness of the surrounding woods. I wasn't worried much yet, and was used to hearing all kinds of strange sounds, and knew it was probably nothing more than some deer or a porcupine at worst. But after a few minutes, and as the rustling seemed to be moving closer, paranoia got a hold of me, and I decided to take some action. Typically during similar late-night adventures, I would just build a campfire to scare away any critters and add some comforting proximity light to the area. But as previously stated, fires, no matter how well contained, were strictly prohibited. Besides, the fact that I could possibly be sighted and fined, I was more worried about actually causing a wildfire, which I would never be able to forgive myself if somehow responsible for destroying the surrounding woods, which I had now considered home. That's when I remembered that in my backpack I had that powerful green laser. I wrestled around the pack in the dark for a few moments, and I kicked myself for not remembering I had brought it, thinking now maybe it could scare off animals. Glad to have found it in hand, I started aiming into the dark woods and bushes where I had heard noises. I felt more at ease for a moment, until the laser hit the eyes of some forest creature in some nearby bushes. The eyes reflecting the laser like what you'd see driving a late-night dark highway, the deer in the headlights effect. Whatever it was, likely a fox, it hopped, screeched, and disappeared into the darkness. I also had with me a small dim headlamp which had remained off the entirety of the night to help keep my natural light vision. I quickly shined it around, but it was pretty much useless in illuminating anything further than a dozen or so feet. A bit startled at this point, but not wanting to head down the mountain just yet, I decided to go against reason and proceeded to build a tiny fire pit, using the stones around me until I had a 1.5-foot circular pit constructed, with a large flat rock to cover the top, that I figured would definitely contain all burning embers and hopefully any light that might be looking to escape. I also stationed my camelback next to it to douse the flames if need be. Still probably the smallest campfire I've ever made. The swouldering twig pile, literally the size of my hand, still immediately put me at ease. That feeling was unfortunately short-lived, and after a few minutes I was feeling guilty about breaking the rules and possibly putting the area in danger with my small fire. But instead of putting it out, I decided it'd be best to have a quick scout around the area to see if I could spot any signs of a possible patrolling forest ranger or nearby campers, even though in my previous 5 years hanging around here, I had never seen a single soul in this area at night. Deciding it couldn't hurt, I made my way over to a scenic overlook which loomed 1,000 feet or more directly over the Georgetown Loop railroad area, with Silver Plume dimly illuminated to the west and Georgetown to the east. I scanned the surrounding woods, looking for any signs of life, and saw nothing unusual. As my fears of breaking the law, or of sparking a natural disaster subsided, I eased back, continued messing around with the laser, wielding it like a lightsaber and tracing the lines of meteors that were still zipping overhead. As midnight approached, I guess I'd had my fill of shooting stars for one night, and decided to take one last look around for fire snitches. As I went over and peered down towards the railroad near the base of the mountain, I noticed what looked like a singular light pop on which quickly turned into 2 lights, which to my stunned dismay appeared to be heading up in my direction. I was immediately taken aback by the sight of any lights in that area, being that the railroad was closed and didn't allow camping on the premises. The 2 lights appeared impossibly to be moving straight up the mountain and directly towards me. The preceding incline between myself and the railroad was luckily made up of dense forest with steep, jagged cliffs, and without a doubt had no roads or trails that would lead straight up to the mountain. My initial thought when the lights appeared was that it must be forest rangers on ATVs or dirt bikes or something, and they somehow miraculously detected my small fire, perhaps with trail cameras, thermal optics, or night vision. I was baffled that there were 2 separate lights, as I had knowledge that we had only one Forest Service employee that oversaw this entire geological quadrangle, and it was highly unlikely, rather inconceivable, that they would be on any kind of watch or patrol that night, much less two of them. Regardless, I stared down in amazement for a moment, quickly calculating that even with fast dirt bikes on some unknown secret trail, I probably had the jump on them by at least 5 to 10 minutes. I turned, urgently gathering my things, and dumped the rest of my water on any remaining embers, just in case the fire was what they were after, and proceeded to scurry in the opposite direction on the main trail that led me back towards Silver Plume. I figured even at a brisk walk, I'd be so far out ahead of any pursuers that I needn't worry too much, and made my way without any flashlight or headlamp, as to not draw any further unwanted attention. Was there really anybody headed up the mountain to look for me anyway? It seemed completely improbable, and I was probably overreacting to the movement of some odd lights, so I was telling myself. After a couple of minutes, I made it maybe 200 yards down the trail and quickly glanced back to Pavilion Point. To my complete and utter horror, I could see what looked like a couple of bright flashlights darting around from left to right, frantically searching around the same area I had built my fire pit. I couldn't believe my eyes, and a deep sense of dread flooded over me. Although thoroughly confused now, I supposed that my fire must have been spotted, and I was likely in a lot of trouble. In this moment, I still believed that the lights had to be some type of forest ranger or law enforcement, cracking down hard the imposed fire ban. Realizing now that if caught I would probably receive a misdemeanor citation and be fined upwards of $2,000, I began to run. As I got into full sprint, I reached over my shoulders and grabbed both rock and hammer and hatchet off my pack that had started clanking together loudly. The headlamp around my neck I would click on, then off, for only a second at a time every dozen paces or so. Like I mentioned at the start, it was very, very dark, and there were many twists and turns along this trail. With that in mind, I realized that taking the switchbacks would not be an ideal way of getting down this mountain, and so started darting down some smaller offshoot deer trails that, though tighter and more treacherous, would ultimately get me down faster. As I turned and jetted down one of these more concealed byways, I could see one of these lights, and looked kind of like a motorcycle headlight, which was headed right down the main trail in my direction. I could also see that the second light had picked a different trajectory, towards me from Pavilion Point, making a beeline that, to my bewilderment, shot it up over the tree line straight in my direction. At this moment, my mind felt like it had exploded. There was now no possible explanation for the situation I now found myself in. Things were not adding up in any logical way, not even close. First, the improbability that my fire could have been traced or seen, nearly zero. Second, 2 rangers or law enforcement in the area willing to give pursuit, also nearly zero. Third, the fact that those lights could traverse what dense and steep mountain face within mere minutes, for sure was impossible. And now, one of the lights had taken flight, literally defying gravity in front of my eyes, as it effortlessly glided over the thick wooded pines that covered the entire area. Mind blown. All of a sudden, this was no longer about getting a ticket, or to be fined, or receiving a stern scolding about forest safety and whatnot. No, I didn't have time to think about it. My legs never stopped moving as I squinted my eyes trying to see my way down this god-forsaken mountain. I clicked the headlamp on, off, never slowing down. On and off. Another dozen paces. On and off. And that's when I felt it. Within a split second. All of a sudden I'm completely weightless. Silence. What's happening? Did I die? Had I been shot or something? And then I heard a crack smash as my legs hit hard wood and broke through thick tree branches. I relaxed my hands, and the hatchet and rock hammer were gone. Sharp pain, and I immediately thought my legs were broken. I was spinning. No, tumbling. One last crash, as I landed on my back against what felt like solid rock, and another lightning bolt of pain. This time my tailbone, as my back end flattened against the rock pile, I felt had broken, and my legs felt broken too. I didn't know what had just happened, as blinding pain was now all over my body as I lay my head back for a second to get my bearings. I could see overhead behind me, up about 20 to 30 feet, on what must have been the trail I was just on. The zooming purplish-white light continued down the small deer trail towards town, and half a second later, out in front of me and slightly downhill, zoomed the second light, now below the tree line on the adjacent main trail, running parallel to the one that had disappeared beneath my feet. I lay for a second, wondering if I was dead, then wondering how many bones I had broken, and feeling around my body for a moment with bloodied wet hands. Slowly I realized that I had just run straight off a cliff face, hit a huge pine on the way down, that flipped me into a cartwheel twice before smashing ass first onto a slightly exposed rock pile. Damn it. And I was almost there, having made it about 3/4 the way down the mountain. I tried to move, but the pain made me almost cry out in agony. I slid myself slightly to the right, off of some of the bigger boulders I had landed on, and onto a softer spot of ground. Before I could even think for a second, I saw both lights headed back down the main trail that was located about 30 feet in front of me. I gasped, then held my breath as the lights approached, hearing what sounded like faint, garbled walkie-talkie radio chatter. I quickly reached into my pocket and switched my phone off so it wouldn't make a sound or ping my location. As the lights got closer and passed in front of me, I could finally see what the hell it was that had had me in pursuit for the last 10 minutes. Side note: the typical hike down from Pavilion Point into Silver Plume took at least 30 to 40 minutes, and I had almost made it down with probably a quarter mile or so before I would have stepped back into the lights of civilization. But no, now I'm stuck on an angled rocky slope, bleeding all over, not sure the extent of my injuries. As I stared out in front of me at the returning chasers, I could see humanoid figures riding on what looked like futuristic motorcycles. But where are the wheels? Why is their movement so smooth and steady? Also, why aren't these machines making any noise? Motorcycles and dirt bikes are loud, annoyingly loud, but these seem to make no sound. Am I deaf? Did I lose my hearing in the crash? No, wait. Did I lose my mind in the smash-up? What the hell is going on? At this moment, I'm not sure if I'm even still alive. Are these postmodern demons hovering around to take me on to the next place? I can't make any sense of it. I can't believe what I'm seeing. No, not demons. I got it. Aliens. That's got to be it. Maybe. Anyway, the hoverbikes, which I'll now refer to them as, passed me by, seemingly unawares of my banged-up presence. It seemed as though their riders had at least abandoned their vehement searching for me. They moved slowly and gracefully now, gliding so seamless and smooth versus the frantic and accelerated pace of our prior melee. I squinted in the darkness to try and make out these riders. Blurry vision. They appeared to be wearing what looked like all-white or greyish attire, head to toe, and I hear more faint radio garble, but can't make out the sounds. Is it English? Foreign? Is it even a language? I don't know. I exhaled my breath, which I'd been holding for God knows how long, and tried to calm down for a second. A few moments passed, I think. I don't know how long, as I just lay there trying to breathe. What the hell just happened? And what the hell are those things? Who are those people? Before I have any longer to ponder the matter, I see in the trees more hovering dim lights coming back my way. Oh, Jesus. A few seconds later, I see those two hoverbikes, now without any headlights on, hovering through the forest on the trail below me. A little further away, I see two more, then three more, further in the distance. Most of the hoverbikes passed quietly and just kept going westward, disappearing through the woods. I'm not sure how many I counted, maybe 10, maybe 12. I felt like my mind was completely broken. This can't be happening. Then just off the trail in front of me, two of the bikes stopped and the riders jumped off. I can see the dim shape of their outlines against the dark forest, and it appears to me now that they're wearing what looks like chemical hazmat suits, like something out of the movie Outbreak or Arrival. Big full round-faced Tyvek suits or something. They didn't have any flashlights or anything, and it didn't appear like they were still looking for me at all. They stood next to their hoverbikes as the craft started moving very slowly, their occupants walking alongside. Across the side of the bikes, I could see very dim lights slowly flashing across from one end to the other, going from reddish to orange to yellow to very dim. Lights moving from left to right. The bikes hovered for a moment and stopped. The riders now grabbed what appeared to be staffs of some sort, or some kind of tool from the opposite side of their bikes. They both took a few steps from the hoverbikes, bent over and started stabbing at the ground. No, they're digging. It looks like they're digging. What the hell is going on here? I kept watching, squinting my eyes, trying not to breathe, and too afraid to make a sound, staying completely still even though my body, especially my ass bone, is screaming in pain. But I won't move, not even a muscle. And after digging for a few seconds, the beings returned to the bikes. What looked to be small, round compartments running alongside the bikes, think saddlebags but flush and internal, opened up, and the contents of their shovels are whisked inside these compartments. I am completely stunned at this point, and totally overwhelmed, engulfed in fear, agony, dread, you name it, and I don't know what I'm even looking at. Are these people? Like human people? Are they aliens? Are they scientists? I can't tell with those weird suits they've got on. I watched them work, repeating the cycle, taking samples, inserting samples into craft, moving along a few feet, taking more samples, etc. These hoverbikes can even 0-point turn, spinning around 180 degrees from time to time. I heard no noise during all of this, no talking, not even forest sounds. At this point, I'm beginning to think I've had some sort of psychotic episode with involuntary hallucinations, fear and paranoia. Maybe this is a dream. It doesn't feel like a dream. It doesn't feel like hallucinations either, at least not from any drug I've tried. Those types of hallucinations have definable characteristics, silver linings, waves, melting, and can be shook off with ease most times. But what's happening right now is none of those things. Maybe this is something new. My mind starts reeling. Am I crazy? Am I not crazy? Is this real? What is real? What the hell is happening? I can't make any sense of it as I sit and watch these things, these beings, these people or whatever, with their bikes or hovercrafts or ships or who the hell knows for quite some time. This is torture. How did they figure out where I was? The laser, maybe. If it's aliens, they saw the laser. I don't know. Maybe if it's people, they saw the laser. Now the fire seems to have had nothing to do with all of this. Or did it? Madness. This is madness. I've gone mad. Everything was just fine before all of this. I didn't take any weird drugs today. I don't think, at least. At least not of my free will. How did it go from innocent meteor shower to all of this? I've heard other weird conspiracies involving the government doing shady things in these mountains. Is this that? Am I sitting on a top-secret research facility? Just stand up and walk home. It's all a figment of your imagination. A mind mess-up, a glitch. You've hit your head or depleted your oxygen. Who knows? But it's all in your head. But I can't. This is happening. I know it's happening. All these thoughts plus a million others racing through my brain. It all seems so clear though. Clarity, yes. As I ponder my predicament, I stare up to the sky, and as I look, I see a drone pass over. An honest-to-goodness, recognizable drone. I think I can even hear it. It has lights that blink, red, green, red, green. It passes overhead and out of view. It's grounding. Well, not literally, but it feels grounding. It feels real. I'll even see a few more as the minutes turn to hours. I wonder what they're doing, why these people or things are combing the forest, taking samples, and for what. As the hours pass by, I witness their workings, and I still feel crazy. I keep trying to convince myself that this is all a hallucination and that I can just go home whenever I want. Just stand up, walk through these people, these hoverbikes and drones. Just walk by, wave and say goodnight. If it's not real, then I can just go home. But if this isn't real, then where to home would I be walking? I sit still, focus on my breathing, slowly in and slowly out. As crazy as I feel, there's a part of me that knows this is actually happening. And that I can't just stand up, because then they'll catch me. Why did they chase me in the first place? This doesn't seem to be about fire. What would they have done if they had caught me? Scare me, beat me, kill me? I mean, I was literally seconds away from being nabbed. They had closed in on me. The speed that they were traveling, the trajectory, the other bikes strategically poised to cut me off, all literally seconds away. Then I ran off that cliff edge. Total freak-out accident. Couldn't have planned it if I wanted to. At one point during all of this, one of the suits got within 15 to 20 feet of me, before moving on. Didn't they see me? I thought for a few minutes that one of these people were actually staring right at me. It's hard to tell with a devoid masked chemical suit, but still, it looked like it was looking right at me for what felt like forever. Then they just moved on, digging, grabbing leaves off trees, etc. I focused on my breathing, and at one point I remembered coming up with some mantra, saying it over and over and over again. I would never be able to have another thought outside of that mantra. Funny that now, I can't even recall what exactly I was saying to myself, but I just needed to get through it. If this is real, I told myself, then time, as I understand it, must be real. And time meant that at some point the sun must rise. If this is real, then the sun must rise. So I waited, watched, chanted, breathed, until finally, much to my surprise, I could see the sky shade changing. Then the stars started to disappear. And with the hint of dawn, I heard sound coming from the whoever-whatevers, and quick chattering sound garble. And then I saw them hovering by one, just as they had come, going east towards Georgetown. Hovering along the trails below the tree line, I tried to count as they went by, hoping to note when the last one was finally gone, quickly realizing I didn't really know how many had come. And so I sat, still perfectly still, and the dawn rose. I had made it this long. I could make it a few minutes longer. To be snagged at this point, caught, would be unforgivable, no matter how painful. And so the dawn came and went, and the sun rose, and when the sun rose, so did I. When I finally stood up on rubbery limbs, I could barely keep my balance. I looked down to see both legs of my pants were completely stained in blood below my knees, but I didn't care. I felt around to my tailbone, which now had a golf ball-sized knot that ached with such ferocity. As I looked around, I could finally see what had transpired just hours previously. I found my tossed rock hammer and hatchet close by. Finally, I climbed back up to the shortcut deer trail that I had run off of, saw the tree that I had clipped, missing huge broken branches at knee level. I looked around the area where I had landed at large, sharp, protruding boulders and other broken branches with points that would have impaled me if I hadn't landed on the rocks exactly where I did. Holy crap. I should be dead. I gathered my things and started limping home, with mind still confused and reeling, but alive, no doubt. I never felt better to be climbing the stairs to my apartment, beelined straight for my bed, about to pass out from exhaustion, when I realized I had an appointment in 2.5 hours to get my hair cut. Well, at least I can power nap an hour before trying to explain to my hairdresser why I can't even sit in her chair. Oh well. And that's just the beginning of a story that would unfold over the next couple of days, here in the Colorado Rockies, surrounding Silver Plume. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.